delays and the mix-ups. So we'll have to sort out the technology for next week, but for this week I'll have to make do with speaking on my phone. So first of all, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining this evening. I hope you've managed to get the downloads of the source sheets which I gave out. The source sheet comes from Rabbi Wolber's Alei Shur. Rav Wolber was a Bal Musa. He was a student of the Musa movement, and founded first by Rabbi Yisrael Salanta, and focused on character development, ethical development, and he wrote 2 volumes of probably the classic Musa work of the second half of the 20th century, of the post-war years. And last term we began looking at some of his writings, and we looked at a fascinating chapter in which he asks the question, Mahu Adam, what does it mean to be a human being? What is the essence of a human being? What does it mean to be a person? What sort of person are we meant to be? And this question really comes ahead of almost any other question we can ask. Because before we ask ourselves how we're meant to develop as growing people, as Jews in our Avodas Hashem, the first question that needs to be asked is, what does it mean to be a human being? Once we discover what a human being is, then on that can be developed, that foundation can be developed, everything else, which is the people we want to be. So this is the topic of the discussion, the chapter that we looked at last term, and also the topic of the discussion, the chapter that we're going to be looking at, trying to look at now. So last term we looked at the first perek in the second volume of Alei Shur. This term we're going to look at the second perek in Alei Shur, in which he continues this theme of trying to see what the Torah tells us about the definition of what a human being is. And in the first chapter, he looked at sources from Torah Shebichsav, and a very, very fascinating piece there about the Chezkel Hanavi, who is described uniquely as Ben Adam, as a human being. But in this chapter, he looks at Chazal, at Torah Sheba'al Peh, and what Chazal, Torah Sheba'al Peh have to say on the topic. So that's what we're going to focus on here in this section. We're going to look at Chazal and what they have to say about the topic. I would say, please, everyone at the moment is muted, but please, if there's something you want to ask about or clarify, please just unmute yourself and ask. Given the limitations of Zoom, it'd be nice if we can make this as nonetheless as interactive as possible. So please do feel free to ask and question if you wish. So says Rav Wolber here in chapter 2 of Alei Shur, in the handout, Gidrei Adam b'Chazal, the definition of what it means to be a human being as per the thought of the sages, as per the thought of Chazal. The perek there, says Rav Wolber, Nisponein be'ezras Hashem, we're going to reflect, with the help of God, B'chol ha'gdarot shel Adam hanimtzat b'Chazal, with all the definitions of what a human being is, as are found in the sages, in the writing of Torah Sheba'al Peh, and through so doing, we will try to describe a picture draw a picture of what a person is meant to be. So Rav Wolber here explains this is not going to be a philosophy session. This is going to be what he calls a hitbonanut. It's going to be a reflection, and it's going to be an artistic or creative experience. We're trying to paint a picture of what it means to be a human being. That's what this topic is about. And he starts off in his first section, and it's going to be quite fast moving here, with lots of little pieces where he basically explores the whole breadth of Torah Sheba'al Peh. That means the Gemara sources and the Midrashim and many other sources. And out of them all tries to find every source and every reference where there's a clue to what a human being is meant to be. And the first source he draws his insight from is a Gemara in Baba Kama. Now, Baba Kama means the first gate, and it's one of the first 3 Masechtas in the section of Gemara that deals with Nezikin, with damages and with monetary law. And the opening topic in Baba Kama is about the halacha of a mazik, different forms of damage which we human beings can inflict on each other. and our responsibility to each other. So one form of damage is what's called in Gemara terminology a shur, an ox. In other words, if I have possessions, animals which damage, and my responsibility to look after my pets or my animals to ensure they don't do damage. So if I have a pet dog and the pet dog goes and bites someone, I have a responsibility because I need to ensure that my animals don't do damage. Another halachic category is eish. If I light up my property and then it goes and spreads and does damages elsewhere, then again the Gemara discusses the nature of my responsibility when damage is done in that manner. It's relevant now. It's being discussed by the postscript. If I infect someone, if I don't keep isolation laws, and I unwittingly or carelessly end up infecting someone, I go outside and I shouldn't have when perhaps I've got the symptoms, and I infect someone. Am I a muzik? Do I bear responsibility for the damage that I've caused to people? And what's the financial implications of this? So this is the topic of the first sugya, the first issues discussed in Baba Kama. So amongst the various classes of muzik is one muzik referred to by the Pasuk as maveh, and mem-base ayin hey. And this is a pasuk in the sections of the Torah that deal with the classes of muzik, classes of damagers. And there's one damager referred to by this unusual phrase, maveh. And the Gemara is unsure what this unusual phrase means. And the Gemara answers it, and it discusses as follows. And we'll look inside now, in the handout sheet, after the Aleph, the first section. Rav Omar, the Amura, the Gemara rabbinic figure, Rav says, Maveh ze Odom. Maveh is a term used for a human being. And forgive me, I know this is a little technical, but we'll get clear where Rav Olber is going in a moment with this. He says, Maveh ze Odom. Maveh is the term used for a human being. Dichsiv, Omar Shomer Osa Bokev, Gam Laila, Im Tavoy Boyu. So it quotes a pasuk to prove that a human being can be referred to Maveh. Why can a human being be referred to Maveh? Because the root of Maveh is Bo'o, Boyo, which means to request. Boyo who loshen tefillah, says Rav Olber. It's the language used for prayer. V'nikra adam kan Maveh al shem shehu mitpalel. So this is fascinating. This Gemara is suggesting that one of the names given to a human being is a prayer, someone who prays. Not the prayers in a tefillah, but mitpalel. So when we ask ourselves, what is a human being? We can answer lots of answers to that question. We need to look at the terms the Torah gives to us as human beings. And we discussed in the previous chapter some of this language. Odom, what does the word Odom mean? Ish or Isha, what do those words mean? But one of the terms, the languages used by the Torah to describe a human being is maveh, is someone who engages in tefillah, someone who engages in prayer. And this is fascinating. Why is this a definition of what a human being is? A human being in this chapter is defined as someone who engages in tefillah, someone who engages in prayer. Is that at the heart of what it means to be a human being? When we think about ourselves and we ask, what am I as a human being? Maybe we would answer that we are spiritual beings, maybe physical beings, intellectual beings, emotional beings, or some weird and complicated combination of all of those. But the Gemara tells us that one way of defining what a human being is that we are beings who engage in prayer. So what does this mean, and how we meant to understand this? Says Rav Olber, Zehu Hagdara Ha'lemet et Odom. This is a definition that's suitable and appropriate and encompassing for what a human being is. Kimikol HaNivroim, out of all creatures, who are Yechidi, we humans are the only ones who are capable of standing in front of God and speaking to Him. So here Rav Olber makes an important point, which he's going to elaborate on, that one of the most abstract activities that we human beings can do, and one of the most spiritual activities that we human beings can do, is to engage in prayer to Hashem. To be able to stand in front of God in prayer is a complicated and abstract form of interaction, and not one that is simple to do at all. And here Rav Olber very briefly diverts, and he defines what the essence of prayer is, and then we'll come back to try and understand what this tells us about what a human being is. And he quotes the famous Reb Chaim Brisker, Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, who is one of the most influential thinkers in halachic and Gemara learning over the last in the last century, founder of the Brisker way of thinking and the ancestor of many of the great Soloveitchiks who follows him. And Reb Chaim Brisker discusses what prayer is. And he speaks about this terminology that we often use when we talk about tefillah, which is kavanah. When I daven, I have to have kavanah. When I'm praying, when I'm engaging in tefillah, when I daven, I have to have kavanah in my davening. So what do we mean exactly when we say we have to have kavanah in davening? So kavanah is used in lots of different ways. For example, when I do a mitzvah, the halacha is that mitzvahs tzrichas kavanah. If I do a mitzvah, I need to have kavanah when I do the mitzvah. So I shake lulav esrog, or I listen to the shofar Rosh Hashanah. I have to have kavanah. But this is a very basic level of kavanah. All it really means is I need to know that I'm performing a mitzvah. I have to be aware that I'm performing a mitzvah. So if I accidentally do a mitzvah without realization that what I'm doing is a mitzvah, then I have not fulfilled my obligation. So for example, if I enjoy the weird and wonderful sounds of different musical instruments, and I'm going through my music collection, and I blow a ram's horn, and then afterwards I remember, it was Rosh Hashanah today, well, let that be my fulfillment of my mitzvah. That's not a fulfillment of the mitzvah, because mitzvahs tzrichas kavanah, because mitzvahs need to be fulfilled with intentionality. But when we talk about tefillah, that's not exactly what we mean by kavanah in tefillah. And Reb Chaim explains that kavanah in tefillah means two things. The first thing it means is that we have to understand the words we are saying. We have to know the translation of what we're saying. Because if we're speaking to God and we don't understand the translation of what we're saying, then in what sense is this speaking to Hashem? This is merely repeating syllables, but this isn't a genuine expression of ourselves in that talking to Hashem. But the second meaning of kavanah in tefillah is that I have to be aware that I am omed lifnei hamakom. I have to be aware that I'm standing in front of Hashem at that moment as I am engaged in tefillah. And the reason for this is because, and this is the reason Revolver is bringing it, is because without it, then that isn't the essence of tefillah. If I blow a shofar, even if I am not conscious of what the action is doing, at least I'm doing the act of blowing the shofar, or shaking the lulav, or most other action-based mitzvahs. If I eat matzah on Pesach, so I've done the mitzvah, I've done the act of eating matzah by the mere engagement with the physical activity of eating it. However, when it comes to tefillah, it's different, because tefillah is an abstract experience. The only thing that makes it into tefillah, that makes it a prayer experience, is that I'm aware that I'm omed lifnei hamakom. And therefore, the most basic meaning of kavanah in the context of tefillah is that I'm aware that I am standing in front of Hashem. And without that, this isn't the activity of tefillah at all. In which case, as Revolver, this helps us realize that the essence of what a person is, the grandeur of what a person can aspire to, is to be able to be omed lifnei hamakom, to be aware that we can stand in front of Hashem and engage in a meaningful relationship. So when we ask ourselves, what is a human being? From the first source that Revolver has shown us in Torah Sheba'al Peh, the answer is a being who's able to stand and be aware of standing in front of Hashem. What does this mean that we're able to be aware that we're standing in front of Hashem? Well, it means an awful lot. It means so much about our life. It means we're aware that we're standing in front of Hashem, i.e. we're creatures, we're created, and that life is a gift that not achieved by ourselves, not earned through our own wonderful qualities, but something given to us from outside ourselves. We're aware that it's not just achieved by the random fluctuation of particles in the universe, in an indifferent universe, but it's part of what it means to be a gift given by, freely chosen, given to us by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, by Hashem. So this is the second element of what it means to stand in front of Hashem. And it also means we're aware that our actions have significance and need to be thought through. Because to be a person standing in front of Hashem, engaged in existing in the world and engaged in tefillah, means that we're aware, Shivisi Hashem, that we're constantly in the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, constantly in the presence of God, and therefore we need to weigh up our actions because they're significant. They're done in front of Hashem, and they can be better or worse activities. So this is a state of consciousness that Revolve is describing to us, which is the essence of what it means to be a person. And in a sense, he's talking about even pre-Yiddishkeit. These first couple of chapters are telling us about what the Torah says, but they're telling us about what the Torah teaches us about what it means to be a human being. So even before we enter into the world of halacha and avodas Hashem and other dictates of Torah and mitzvahs and halacha, there's a basic groundwork that needs to be laid. What sort of person am I? What does it mean to be a human being? And the first part of the answer is to be conscious that as a human being, I stand and I exist in the presence of Hashem. Number one, life is a gift given to us by a creator who's chosen to create us. And number two, our actions have significance and responsibility. Thirdly, and most importantly, this is a creator who wants a relationship with us, and we're able to converse with him. We're able to speak to him. We're able to interact with him. And the most accessible form of so doing is tefillah. And this is the reason why a human being is described as a mother. When we ask ourselves, what is a human being? A human being is a mother, a requester, an asker, a prayer, someone who asks and prays and is aware of standing in front of Hashem. Now, the word mother, the root of the word mother, as I said, comes from the word boyer, to ask or request, which the Gemara interprets to mean tefillah. But of course, it also tells us something else about what a human being is. A human being is a being that has wants. And again, just like Rav explained to us, that a human is unique in being able to pray, being able to daven, being aware of Hashem's presence in the world. And as far as we know, no other creature is aware of a creator, no other creature is aware of Hashem's presence in the world. Similarly, a human being is unique in having ambitions, having drives, having dreams beyond the fulfillment of their immediate needs, having wants. Animals have lacks which they need to fill, but they don't plan for the future. They don't engage in long-term dreams about where can I go and what can what might I be like in 3 years' time, in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time. They don't have long-term ambitions which they might spend 20 years of investment in fulfilling. And this is another aspect of what it means to say a human being is a wanter. So the Gemara, in telling us that the meaning of the word of mother is a human being, is telling us that a human being is someone who has wants and desires and dreams at their essence, and hopefully channeled into tefillah, into realizing that we can make these requests from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So this is the first little paragraph that Revolver writes in trying to understand what a human being is. Before I pause, I'm happy to pause for questions if anyone wants to ask anything. I'll just read the last paragraph of Revolver there in the first section, which we missed out. And he says, this is an appropriate title for a person. Out of all creatures, we are the only ones who are aware that we exist in the presence of Hashem, and speaks and communicates to him. And then he carries on, the Gaon Reb Chaim from Brisk, Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, in prayer and tefillah, there's two kavanos, two meanings of the word kavana. HaKavana shel Maaseh HaTefillah, the kavana of the very act of prayer, number one. The kavana shel Perish HaMilos, and the second one is the kavana of the meaning of the words. And kavanos Maaseh HaTefillah, the essence of the kavana, the intention of what makes an act of tefillah into prayer, Yishur Omed B'nei Hashem, is the awareness that we stand in front of Hashem. And therefore he finishes, Harizuhu Zehu Mahusoi, V'gam Gadlusoi Shel Adam. This is the mahut, the essence and the greatness of a human being. Asher b'koicho, that is in our potential, to stand in front of Hashem and engage in conversation with him. Revolver here uses the very important words which he used a lot in modern Hebrew, mahusoi. Mahusoi is not, at its roots, is a word from Lashon HaKodesh. It's not a word that we find in Torah Shebechsav or even in Chazal. Mahus comes from the word ma, what? Mahusoi means the whatness of something. What's the essence of something? So he says the essence of a person is that the mahut, the ma-ness of a person, the whatness of a person is that we have have the potential to stand in front of Hashem. Now, of course, it doesn't mean that we are automatically aware of this, but the potential to stand in front of God, that is one definition of what a human being is. I'll pause there, and if anyone is happy to ask a question, I'm happy to take them. Otherwise, I'll carry on.
I kind of have a question.
Yes.
Sorry, I don't know if you can hear me. Yeah. Just in the terms of it's being able to say the same thing, saying the same thing again and again to kind of create that kavana, which is like lasting when you're saying this like a continuous thing, and yeah, it's a conversation, but there's kind of, I don't know, at least for me, there's a bit of a repetition in terms of not being more free with your words. So I don't know if that's like, I don't know how to connect that, I guess.
Yes. Okay, so this is a very important point. It deserves really a structured response about tefillah, but I'll just make a couple of comments. The first thing is that originally tefillah was not meant to be this set formula as we know it now, and was not meant to be repeated 3 times a day of the same set formula in the way that we have it. The background to the creation of our text of tefillah is that it dates back to the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, the men of the Great Assembly, about 2,500 years ago, around the time when the Jewish people returned after their the Golus, the exile after the destruction of the first Beit HaMidrash, and they returned from Bavel, from Babylonia, to Eretz Yisrael, and a group of the leaders, the prophets and the first non-prophet leaders, what we nowadays would call Rabbonim, post-prophecy leaders, got together in a very large conference, the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, and amongst other things, they set a fixed text for tefillah, which is more or less the text of the Amidah, the Shemona Esrei that we use to this day. Now, this was not originally an ideal at all. It was not the way things were meant to be. Originally, people were meant to daven, and they were meant to say their own language, their own way of speaking, and express whatever they wanted to express in their communication to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. However, when they came back after this Golus, this exile in Bavel, in what we'd call modern-day Iraq, and ended up back in the land of Israel, the leadership of the Jewish people realized 2 things. The first thing they realized was that the majority of Jews had not returned. Much like nowadays, the majority of the Jewish population still lives outside Eretz Israel, even though technically we have the possibility of being there. Similarly, when the rulers, Darius, allowed the Jewish people to move back, Koresh allowed the Jewish people to move back to Eretz Israel, the majority of Jews decided to stay in Bavel. They become settled there. And the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah realized that what they had thought was going to be a short-term aberration, 70 years of exile, and then everyone moving back to Eretz Israel was not the case. The Jewish people had changed permanently, or near permanently, till the end of days, till Mashiach comes. And it was not going to be just a short 70-year exile. The majority of Jews were now going to be scattered throughout the world. So this was realization number 1. Realization number 2 that they came to was that Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people, had lost Lashon HaKodesh as their first language, and they now spoke Aramaic, a cousin language, a kindred language of Hebrew, a Semitic language, but no longer were they speaking Hebrew. They had picked up what the Bavliim, the Aramaic that they spoke in Bavel, and that become their language. And throughout the era of the second Beit HaMikdash, even though Jewish texts were written often in Lashon HaKodesh, like the Mishnah, however, they were speaking Aramaic to each other. In fact, as we know, the last 2 books of Tanakh are written partially in or largely in Aramaic because of this phenomena. The Targum is written in Aramaic, and so on and so forth. So Jews were no longer speaking Lashon HaKodesh. As a result, they lost the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah were worried that people would not be able to express themselves appropriately in Lashon HaKodesh. Lashon HaKodesh, Hebrew, was no longer their mother tongue. And also, because Jews were scattered throughout the world, they would gradually pick up different mother tongues. And you end up with Jews speaking Russian and Aramaic and English and French and so on and so forth. And there wouldn't be the ability for tefillah to be expressed in one language by one people. And there wouldn't even be the ability to express it in Lashon HaKodesh at all. And as a result, we ended up with a fixed text of tefillah as we know it now in Lashon HaKodesh. However, this presents 2 challenges. The first is very often we don't even understand the words we're saying. So if we don't understand the words we're saying, then we're not going to have a meaningful tefillah experience. So this is the first and most important thing. If we want our tefillah to be meaningful, we need to engage seriously with understanding it. The most basic level, of course, is the translation. But beyond that, even when we translate it, it's often very strange and a difficult text. We don't understand why it's structured in the way it is, and we don't understand the content and the meaning. And because all translations don't really capture the essence of the word, it all sounds a little bit archaic and a little bit difficult to understand. And because of that, it's very hard to have a meaningful tefillah experience, number one. So we need, as a priority, to properly learn tefillah, and it should be on one sort of top 10 list of learning ambitions. Should be engaging properly with tefillah, with the Mefarshim, and trying to understand the structure of what's going on. So that's point number one. Without that, of course, tefillah is not going to be meaningful. Point number two is we need to engage in trying to make our tefillah applicable to our circumstances. So this does make one's Amidah a little longer, but as we say, each bracha, we need to think, okay, and how does this apply to me uniquely in this part of the day that I've just been through, or the part of the day I'm about to confront? So one's Shacharis should be different to one's Mincha should be different to one's Mariv. So if it's Shacharis, one's thinking, okay, I've just been asleep, and now I'm got up, and now I'm about to go off and do things, and therefore when I say out to Chum and Ozam Das, I'm thinking about a different sort of intelligence to the intelligence I might need in the evening when perhaps I'm sitting with my family and I've got social interactions or friends. In the morning, maybe I'm going off to work or studies, and therefore that's a different sort of intelligence. So you need to think, what am I using my mind for in this time of the day? What do I need my health for in this time of the day? So we need to apply it afresh and anew to each of life's circumstances. The third thing I would say is that we need to sort of also buy into the fact that tefillah will often be difficult, and we need to make sure that we therefore do say some tefillah which fits what Revolver is talking about, which is a real act of wanting and asking and interaction. And it's definitely therefore important that at the end of every tefillah or after each bracha, maybe pause for a few minutes and say in English a personal request that's connected with what one's just davened about. And this doesn't need to be a lengthy thing. It can just be 30 seconds in which one speaks in English, which is our mother tongue, and just turns to Hashem and engages in conversation with him. And this is something that was done throughout the generations by all the Gedolim and by all great people and by simple people alike. This was considered a completely normal thing until very recent times. And this is definitely therefore an appropriate thing for all of us to do. At the end of the tefillah, stop and in English, just say what's on one's mind, and just say what's going on and say. Sorry, I got muted there for some reason. Say what one's thinking about, and through so doing, that will hopefully enhance one's tefillah. So that's just some thoughts around this. But you're absolutely right. Revolver brings to our attention that this isn't a small part. This isn't just another area of halacha, another area of our Jewish life. It's really at the heart of our Jewish life that we need to be engaged in conversation with Hashem. Now, I guess the other thing that one could say in connection to this is where's the other half of the conversation? If it's a true conversation, so where is Hashem replying to us? And the answer is we need to hear Hashem's replies also. In other words, every experience that we have in life, we need to ask ourselves, what does Hashem want from us in this? How are we meant to respond? What are we hearing from him? Now, I spoke in my Shabbos HaGadol drasha about the debate between the more philosophically inclined Rishonim and the Rambam and the more Kabbalistically inclined, as to what degree we should look on every event as being uniquely fine-tuned to us and miraculous and so on and so forth. It's a very interesting philosophical discussion. But the reality is that everyone would agree that certainly as things happen to us in life, we need to ask, what are we meant to hear in this experience? What are we meant to understand in this experience? What are we meant to learn from in this experience? How are we meant to react to it? What's it there? How are we meant to use it to grow? And this is hearing Hashem's voice to us back in turn. And if we don't do that, then we're not hearing, and therefore, again, tefillah often feels like a one-way conversation. If it's a one-way conversation, then it's very difficult and hard to engage with. And therefore, it's important that we also have the two-way conversation. And this is part of what Revolver means when he says that we are to be human beings, to be someone who is standing in front of Hashem. If he's just referring to an hour a day maximum that one spends davening between Shachris and Mincha and Mariv, then that's not a human being, that's 1 hour of my day. Revolver is saying 24/7, this is what we are. And once the whole time you're aware that we're standing in front of Hashem, engaged in this conversation, appreciative of what he's giving us, aware that everything we're getting is a gift, hearing what he's saying to us in our experiences, and in turn, yes, for that 1 hour a day, responding back with the parts of tefillah, shabbat, of shrach, of thanks and hodah, of praise and hodah and thanks and bakosha and request. So I hope that sort of addresses that point you were raising.
Thank you.
So this is the first point that Revolver makes. I'll just again pause if anyone else has any questions on this before we move on to the next section. Okay. So the next point Revolver makes, though, is that this is fascinating that the Gemara chooses to teach us this principle in the context of a dry and abstract halachic discussion about nezikin, about damages. Because let's remind ourselves of the context of this very profound idea. The Gemara is talking about mazik, the halachas of responsibility I have as a human being if I cause damage to someone else. If I own an animal, a dog or an ox, and it goes and bites someone or gores someone, I have responsibility. If I light a fire and it causes a burning and damage, I have responsibility. If I cough and infect someone, I have responsibility. All these cases need to, if I drive carelessly, I have responsibility. All these cases need to be looked at through the eye of halacha, of financial halacha, to work out responsibility. But what name do we give to these different categories of damage? How do we refer to them? How are we taught them by the Torah? Well, animals that damage, the Torah uses the example of a shur, an ox. Okay, I get that. That's a common example in those days. A fire that damages, the Torah teaches us that through the word eish. But a human that damages, the Torah tells us, defines that category of damage as a human who damages. But the word it uses for a human is not Adam, is not Ish, is not Enosh, but is Mother, is a praying being. So this is the second aspect, the flip side of the coin of what it means to be a human being. We have this incredible greatness of spirit and potential of going through life, standing in front of Hashem, engaging in conversation with Him. And yet at the same time, we are capable of being enormous damagers, doing enormous damage, far beyond that which anything else is capable of. The damage category of a shur, an animal that does damage, how much harm can a dog or an ox do in its damage? Fire, how much harm can that do? Human beings, we can do anything, we can destroy the world. And this is the next point that Revolver makes. And therefore, let's look after the letter base in the handout, the second paragraph there on the page. When we refer to a human being as being a mother, this refers to a human as one of the four primary categories of damage. We human beings are one of the four classes of damage discussed there by the Gemara in Baba Kama. Ha'adam b'tivoi mazik. A human being, and here Revolver says something very difficult that we're going to have to reflect upon a little bit. A human being in their very nature is a damager. Muad la'olam, always needing to be alert and conscious of what might be the consequences of what they do. Bein er, bein yoshon, whether awake or asleep. So here Revolver refers to a halachic concept, which is that when other forms of damage occur, the owner who's responsible for the damage can argue that they weren't aware that what they had was dangerous. My dog bites someone for the first time. My ox gores someone for the first time. So look, I didn't realize that this was most dogs don't bite, most cows don't do damage. I didn't realize that this was something that was dangerous and that needed guardianship. In halachic terminology, this is unwarned and therefore have limited responsibility. However, a human being is always considered forewarned. And in any situation, a person can't say, I didn't think through the consequences of my action. A person is always responsible. And Revolver uses an example based on this Gemara that he's coming from, bein er bein yoshon, whether a person is awake or asleep, a person is responsible for their actions. This is the Gemara that discusses the case of someone who falls out of their beds, they fall asleep and they roll over and fall out of their bed and they fall on something and damage it. And a human being is responsible even for that, which we may think is the most unforeseen possibility. Nonetheless, that's what it means to be a person. A person is always responsible for their actions, for that which they do. And Revolver, we're not going to have time to, we're running out of time now, we're not going to have time to explore this more fully today. But Revolver says this is the second aspect of what it means to be a human being, is for us to be conscious of the power, our power. As we walk through life, unwittingly, we can just sow and seed damage and we can leave a trail of catastrophe in our wake, completely oblivious to it, completely unaware of it. We can go through life and we can be unconscious of the person we just walked past in the street who nodded hello to us and we ignored because we were busy thinking of something else. and they're hurt and they wonder what we think of them. We can be oblivious to the impact of a little criticism, what we think is a mild criticism that we make to someone, how it can leave them damaged and feeling hurt and feeling bashed. We can be oblivious to the good that we do. We may never be aware of the difference in someone's life, a small passing compliment or a smile that we made to them. So we humans are capable of blundering through life completely unaware of the knock-on effects of what we're doing. And this is going to be the second point that Revolver discusses, that we are exceptionally powerful beings. We have an ability to change the world more than we can possibly imagine. And this is the second element of what it means to be a human being, conscious of the power and impact of actions. So we'll stop there for today, but this is the thought that Revolver says. Looking at Chazal, he's going to go through as many sources as he can in the sages to try and define what a human being is. First definition of a human being, mother. We have wants, we have dreams, we have aspirations, we have visions, we have ambitions. We are aware that we stand in front of Hashem, or we can be aware of that. We can be engaged in meaningful conversation with Him, in a relationship, in an interaction. We can be aware that our life is a gift given by Him freely to us. We can go through life and hear what He's trying to, what we are meant to learn from the experiences that we go through. That's number one. And number two, mother, we're capable of incredible building, but also incredible destruction. Odom muad la'olam, a person always has to be forewarned and forearmed and think through the consequences of what they are doing. So I'll stop there, just pause in case there's any comments or questions, and otherwise we'll bring today's session to a close. I apologize for the late start. Hopefully next week I'll have my technology sorted out and not have a problem getting online. Okay, if there are no questions, I'll stop there. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.